It means that you have access to a library. It could mean that you're not with current times, maybe. Could mean that you like to collect books. You're not necessarily a hoarder, but you like to collect books and paper print. Okay. So the one on the right, the picture on the right, you see, what do you see? You see 3 iPads, different sizes, big, medium, and small. And again, the iPad is a great device. I have one, and I use it frequently. And it does much more than the book, I believe. I've gotten much more out of it than I have the paper print book. What does the iPad signify? Okay, good. So it signifies modern times, you know, the present, and even maybe the future. Although the iPad now is getting a little old, I think they need to come up with something new, you know, get past the iPad. We need to progress. But the iPad is, you know, it's definitely progress and evolution. It signifies, okay, wealth. If you have an iPad, you have a little money. You know, you have money to buy these things. They're not cheap, and if you're living without enough money to educate yourself and everything, it's difficult to buy. You need to have a job and, you know, money. And certainly in some countries, the great majority of the people cannot afford to purchase iPads. It signifies communication. The iPad signifies interconnectivity. It signifies flexibility. You know, so communication, you can contact people all around the place. You can be on the train or walking through the park, and you know, you decide to call your mum, and you get on Skype or something, and there you go. Anywhere you are, you can, you know, as long as you have Wi-Fi and stuff. Or, but, you know, you have Wi-Fi. If you have a phone, you have Wi-Fi and 4G and everything. Okay. What else does the iPad signify? Now, look at the name. The name is iPad. What does the I stand for? I. You know, I could signify many things. Could signify I, so it's a personal pad, internet, interconnectivity, and so forth. The I could also signify internet, the internet I, or information, or something else. Individual, okay. All right, what else does the iPad signify? It signifies, right, there you go, okay, yes. I think, did I hear you correctly? Because your voice is a little low. Disappearance, the transformational qualities of text, yes. Okay, yeah, it's true, because, you know, you can load something and delete it, you can change text, you can, you know, draw things, you can play games, of course, and things come and go. They appear and disappear. Okay, so yeah, the transformational qualities of a text or text. You can delete apps and everything. And, you know, you can have a lot on your iPad, and you can reproduce what is on the server. You can have, you know, a website, a news website, or, you know, something on Facebook or something. You can reproduce it on your iPad, but then you can remove it. So it's not like a paper print book where you need physical space. It reproduces something, but then you delete it. And as soon as you have a look at it, or you access the website, then you remove it, and because you don't need it anymore until tomorrow when you want to tell your friends about what you saw, then you bring it back up. So, you know, spatiality or the spatial component of electronic devices, such as the iPad, take on new meanings and new forms. They appear and disappear, which is a great thing. Okay, it's a great thing. It, you know, it saves us from chopping down trees and all that and everything. Okay, so these two objects signify very different things in many ways. However, they at the same time, they signify similar things, like learning, power, progress, a certain period in time, and they do. Okay, okay, let's continue. So, all right, so now let's move on to looking at some people, and we're going to look at 6 people in the field of semiotics who have been quite important over the past a little over a century now, 120 years or so. And, lots of people have been important in semiotics, and including now, but I'm going to speak about these people initially, then later on we'll speak about other people because these other people are doing work currently and so forth. But these 6 people are, the pioneers. And the 6 people are, of course, as you can see there. Our first one is, of course, Ferdinand de Saussure. And Ferdinand Monguin de Saussure is long gone. He died in 1913, which is over 100 years ago. He was born in 1857, which is, getting to 200 years ago. Not yet, but, 150 years ago, 140 years ago. Sorry, 160 years ago. And he was a Swiss linguist and semiotician. Ferdinand de Saussure is somebody we're going to discuss extensively. We're also going to discuss the others and others and others and others, but Ferdinand de Saussure we're going to, number 1, discuss, number 2, be quite critical about in due course, not today. He is the founder of 20th century linguistics. Well, I don't know. But some proponents of his work, strong proponents of his work, and that he was the most influential person, do say that he was the founder of 20th century linguistics and the major founder of semiotic semiology. Again, it's up to contestation. Okay. The second person we're going to look at now is a guy called Charles Sanders Peirce. Okay. Now, I hear a few grunts there, and we've spoken about this before. And when I say the word Peirce, people say, well, okay, those of you who know me, they know that this is my trick. Those of you who don't know me, they look at me strangely and say, well, does this guy know anything about linguistics or semiotics? And, I'll say the same thing that I've long said. Some people do not pronounce it Peirce. In fact, most people do not pronounce it Peirce. And most people say Peirce. And that's a great example of the sign. What does the word P-E-I-R-C-E signify? It signifies, well, to people who don't know, to people not in the loop, people who are not in the know, it signifies Peirce. Okay? I certainly would have, if I had known nothing, I certainly would have said, well, Charles Sanders Peirce. But then, knowing the pronunciation of the name, I say Peirce. So, depending on how familiar you are with the American flag, you see things in a different way. So depending on how familiar you are with the name, you see it in a different way. And then just by hearing that the name is pronounced Peirce, it opens up a whole new set of possibilities. Okay, so Charles Sanders Peirce was born in 1839, and he died in 1914, so it was just after Ferdinand de Saussure. He was an American philosopher. Now remember, Saussure was European, so it was over the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Peirce was on the American side. Okay, so he was an American philosopher, logician, mathematician, scientist, and of course, semiotician. And, he's been called the father of pragmatics and semiotics. He also branched out into pragmatics, and he did work which we would now call pragmatics. All right. The third person we're going to speak to is a man who was born immediately after the death of Saussure and Peirce. And this person is Roland Barthes. Roland Barthes was a literary theorist, philosopher, linguist, critic, and semiotician. Okay, so subsequently semiotician. Now, he lived until 1980. He died in 1980. And it's interesting that 1980, 79, 80, these 2-3 years were the years at which many of these important pioneers died. Okay, he influenced the development of schools of theory, including structuralism, semiotics, social theory, design theory, anthropology, and post-structuralism. We will spend a lot of time discussing structuralism, post-structuralism, and all that stuff in time. Okay. Okay, Roland Barthes was pretty cool. He was a cool guy. Now, the next person is a person who I enjoy very much. I enjoy him because his work, because, you know, he was out there. He was out there. He was cool. He was out there. He did stuff with semiotics. He did a lot of stuff. He was experimental, not always precise, not always. His stuff wasn't always, applicably logical, but it worked. It worked a lot of the time, and you know, he was out there. He did experiment and tried to push the whole field of semiotics forward in some way. Jacques Lacan, Jacques-Marie Émile Lacan. Okay, Jacques Lacan was born in 1901, and he died in September 1981. And I recall, I was a young boy, but I do recall reading about the death of Jacques Lacan. I was very young. I was still in primary school, near the end of my primary school, and I remember speaking, you know, I knew nothing, of course, but I remember speaking to people, and they said, some teachers had said, Jacques Lacan has died. Well, that's very interesting. Who is this Jacques Lacan? And I heard that he was a psychoanalyst, which didn't mean much to me back then, but it does now. He was a psychoanalyst and psychiatrist. So, you know, he was born in 1901, and throughout the whole of the 20th century, he was a psychoanalyst. So the first thing that we think of is, well, who else was there at the beginning of the 20th century and was really big? And we think of Freud. And so when we think of Freud and you think of someone who did so much work with semiotics and psychoanalysis and psychiatry in the 20th century, you think that we assume that this person would have built on Freud, and he did. He was a successor of Freud, and he built on Freudian analysis, mixed that with semiotics and everything. So Lacan did a lot of great stuff. He had a significant impact on later fields, such as post-structuralism, critical theory, linguistics, 20th century French philosophy. Of course, he was French, Jacques Lacan, Marie-Émile Lacan, film theory, and clinical psychoanalysis. Jacques Lacan is a very important man in many ways, and many people love his work, have a high respect for his work, including myself. I have a lot of respect for his work, Lacanian work. Okay, the fifth person we will speak about was born in the same year as Lacan and died in 1979. So he was born in 1901, died in 1979, Charles Morris. Charles Morris was a semiotician and philosopher, and he unified logical positivism with behavioral empiricism and pragmatism. Charles Morris was, again, a very big figure in semiotics, and we will speak about his work. And last of all, Émile Benveniste, who was born in 1902 and died in 1976. So, you know, these people, these final few people, were all the same period, a strong period for semiotics and semiology. Okay, so Benveniste was a structural linguist and semiotician. What does structural linguistics mean? Well, we will discuss that later, but to give you a heads up now, structural linguistics is actually looking for structure in many ways within or across linguistic systems, within a linguistic system or across linguistic systems. Okay, so if you look at a house, for example, every part of a house has its function, and all together, all these functions together make up the house. Without a brick wall, you cannot have a house, despite that you have a roof and foundation and running taps and a sofa. Without running water, you really cannot have a house, right? You know, you don't want to live in a house without running water. You cannot, right? You have to go out to the well and bring back buckets of water. It just doesn't work, right? It would have worked 200 years ago. Without a roof, you don't have a house. So all these different parts function together to produce a house, what we define as a house. Okay, and he worked on Indo-European languages and the expansion of Saussure's work. We're going to look at those people in subsequent parts. Today is part A, so now we're looking at the introduction to this whole thing. Okay, so I'm now showing you 3 pictures. Now, if you look at the first picture, it's a plaster model of, it looks like plaster, maybe plastic, but I think it's plaster, of 5 hands. And they're all, you know, the right hand, and interestingly, they all have 3 fingers, or 4 fingers. No, they have all fingers. They have the 3 bent fingers. They have the forefinger pointed and the thumb on the other side. So they're not Simpson's hands, are they? With 3 fingers and a thumb. They have 4 fingers and a thumb. Okay, so 5 fingers pointing. The next picture is the person wearing the green top, and we cannot see whether it's a man or a woman because it's blurred, but we see the hand quite clearly, and the hand, the forefinger, is pointed right towards us, it appears. And the third one is the Sphinx, and we see in the background, we see, okay, the desert and a pyramid, and I suspect that's Khufu's pyramid. And we see a few people there, and you can see the size of the Sphinx is big. The Sphinx is big. Okay, so we're going to ask some questions now about these. And I've separated the questions into 3 parts. So the primary questions, and if we look at all 3, and I'll let you do a lot of responding to these because, you know, there's so many responses. We couldn't even begin to respond to these questions in the little time we have, or even in our life span. There are so many responses to all these, and they're open to interpretation and everything. So we'll begin and leave it at that. So the primary questions. In all the 3 pictures, who does the pointing? You know, the first one, there is no person, but we see 5 right hands. So we're assuming that the artist or the person producing this wanted to signify that there are many people who are all in consensus or in agreement, and they're all pointing in some way to something. So there's a group community consensus. All right, there's a simple response. Who are they pointing at? Well, we don't know. But the idea is that they're all pointing to the same thing, which is what the person who created the art is trying to convey to us, that there's a common signification there. Okay. Let's look at the second one, the person with the green top. Who are they pointing at, this person? Whether it's a man or a woman, they're pointing at us. But are they pointing at us? Maybe they're pointing at the camera. Maybe they're pointing at the viewer, whoever the viewer is. How does this person know that Michael, that you will be looking at this picture? They don't. Okay? Maybe they're just making a statement. Maybe they're not pointing at anybody. They may be, we don't know, they may have been dancing, the disco dance or something, and at that time, the hand came across, you know, the John Travolta thing, and the hand came across, and at that exact moment in time, the finger was right at the screen. So maybe they're not pointing at anybody. Maybe they're pointing at everyone, making the John Travolta semicircle thing, and, you know, not necessarily pointing at the camera. They may not be looking at the camera. They may be looking at somebody else and saying, look, go away, get out of here. And at that time, the camera was right there where the finger is, and they're indicating to the person, get out of my life, or get out of this room, or, you know, you need to go to school, or something. Okay, So the next question, I guess we'll look at one more question for this. How are they pointing? Well, the first picture, of course, they're pointing in unison. They're pointing all together with their fingers, and they're bending their fingers and keeping the forefinger up. So what does that say? If I point like this, or if I point like this, or if I point like this, it would mean different things. It would signify different things. So how are they pointing? Okay, what does the one forefinger up mean? If we look at the third one, what we see is we don't see a finger, we see eyes and a face looking in a certain direction. Okay, we see the eyes looking above the horizon. Not looking down, but looking up above the horizon. What does this say? The Sphinx, the Sphinx is very interesting, and archaeologists have long attempted to interpret the meaning of the Sphinx. And, some good work has come out of working on the Sphinx. A good friend of mine who was quite a significant archaeologist in England, Christine El-Makdi, who has now passed away, had spoken about the Sphinx, and she was once telling me that the Sphinx is about time, and that it's looking at time, and it's surpassing time, and it's pointing towards the horizon over time. So it's always pointing over the fact that the Earth is turning, and we see the day renew itself every day, but it's seeing past that. So it's stronger than something which is very strong, time. Okay, so it's signifying strength over time. So maybe that the kings are buried in the pyramids and so forth, and in the Valley of the Kings are stronger than time, maybe. Okay, so what's it pointing at? Well, it could be pointing at something greater than time, another dimension, maybe. Okay, secondary questions. We'll go through one of these very quickly. How does the pointing change? Well, the pointing changes with the first picture, the white hands. The pointing changes depending on our perspective of things. If we look at, now we cannot see what the hands are pointing at. We cannot, right? But if we look at what the hands, if we were there in the museum or wherever, and we were to look at what the hands were pointing at, they may be pointing at part B of the work. Could be a flag or food, a bowl of bananas or something, or it could be pointing at a reflection, a mirror or something, we don't know. Could be pointing at nothing. Could be pointing at the sky. Okay, so depending on our perspective, we see what they're pointing at, and we understand more clearly, or we get a stronger understanding of what the artist is trying to convey. So how does the pointing change? It changes depending on our perspective. The second picture, how does the pointing change? Well, again, our perspective, and our perspective of what the finger is pointing at, and our perspective of the person. We don't even know who the person is. So once we get a perspective of the person, then we get a perspective of the change in pointing and how the change occurs and when it occurs and so forth. And the last one, the Sphinx, how does the pointing change? Well, if we were to get a strong understanding of hieroglyphic writing and hieroglyphs, and remember there's a difference between hieroglyph and hieroglyphic. Hieroglyphic is an adjective. A hieroglyph is the actual physical text. Okay. If we were to develop our knowledge of hieroglyphic work and hieroglyphs, then we would definitely, the pointing would definitely change. We'd see that the Sphinx is not actually pointing towards a horizon, or maybe a distant land somewhere or something, a landmark created by UFOs or something at that time. The Sphinx is actually pointing to time. and that it's stronger than time, a strength over time, that it can overcome the defeating aspects of time. Okay, so, but then if we become much wiser and we know about the inclusive properties of Egypt, and Egypt was very inclusive. If you learn about the history, it was spawned a few thousand years, 4,000 or 5,000 years, and in those 4,000 or 5,000 years, it contains a model of every society in the world and everything. If you know about Egyptology and everything, then you understand that the very sad and melancholy aspects of the Sphinx and what the Sphinx is really representing. You know, its strength and yet its defeated mindset. Okay, all right. So quickly, let's take one of the tertiary questions. And the first one asks, or the main one asks, what is the distance between the pointer and the pointed at? And the sub-question there is, what influences this change in distance? Time, situation, attitude, weather, time of day, histories or futures, and so forth. And is the pointed at contingent on the observer, the observed, or other spectators or interlocutors? And the answer there is, the response there is that there are many responses. There are so many contingent factors, and all of these are definite factors in all of these. Absolutely. So I now ask that you take these questions home and you look at them and, you know, have fun with them. Don't yet spend too much time on them. The last part of today's talk or today's session is just some factors that we're quickly going to throw in because we're going to later on discuss them. Okay, so some questions or suggestions I would like you to consider. First of all, texts. A text, whatever the word text means. A text points to what? Speech. Speech by me, speech by a president, speech by an actor, or speech by anybody. And if you've ever seen the TV sitcom Married with Children, which was something that I and my father would sit and watch together many, many years ago, and something that I know many of my friends enjoyed. Al Bundy, who was the father of the family, the father of the family, would give great long speeches sometimes, and you know, sometimes speeches on TV can get boring, but Al Bundy's speeches were very entertaining, and a discourse analysis of these produces some interesting things. So speech points to what? Assumptions point to what? Social convention, rituals and marriages and stuff, and birthdays, and the fact that we have to go to work at 9 a.m. every morning and come back at 5, it points to what? That we have to vote, that we have to pay tax. A personal disposition, your personal disposition, your own disposition. This signifies what? Okay, all of these items signify one to many, many different things, predicated on who we are, where we are, who we're with, our histories, and so forth. Okay, all right, so we're now going to stop, and this is the end of session 2A, the introduction to semiotics, and we will continue next week, with part B. And at that point, we'll begin to look at sign fundamentals.